Role models are hard to find these days, aren't they? I don't mean celebrities, but women and men who are worth pointing to and saying, you see that person over there? That's what I want you to be like when you grow up. But in an age of instant celebrity, when you can become famous and sometimes rich in an afternoon for doing something hilarious or even offensive, is there even a marketplace of role models? In a time when everyone is proud of their individualism and freedom to be yourself and not follow traditional paths for success, why do we even need people to show us how to be successful? We'll chart our own path. Well, on today's State of Independence, we have a woman who spent 40 years living a life of distinction in character and wrote a book about how you too can live a life of purpose. Vice Admiral Sandy Stosz is right here on State of Independence. Stay with us. When Sandra Stosz applied for a spot in the United States Coast Guard, the world was a different place for young women. The career paths and opportunities for service weren't always available, and when they were, women often faced peers who thought that a woman's place wasn't anywhere close to the helm of a ship or even serving in dangerous, often unpredictable waters. After all, the sea has claimed the lives of hundreds of men. Shouldn't women be protected from the hardships of life at sea, shielded from danger? But one day, Sandy took an oath to protect the Constitution and defend the United States. Her performance led to a string of important assignments over the course of her 40-year career. Today, Vice Admiral Stosz looks back on a 40-year career and hopes to point the way for people to find their own path to service. She has written this book on leadership called Breaking Glass and Breaking Ice. Here's the book right here. I hope you get it. Let's talk to our friend, Vice Admiral Sandy Stosz. Sandy, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Joe, and thank you so much for having me on today.
No, I'm just delighted to have you on. I've been excited to meet you and to talk with you. I'm the father of two daughters, and they're two grown daughters who are wonderful human beings. But I don't think we talked extensively when they were young about what they might do with their lives, and they both had wonderful careers and still do. But I don't know that we ever discussed a military career. So tell me about your journey.
Well, I never thought of a military career either. So for context, I was born in 1960. I was the eldest of 4 children with 3 younger brothers. And by the time I entered high school in 1974, we had 1972 was Title IX, which was equal opportunity in education for girls and women, and then the Equal Rights Amendment in 1973. And as I was a junior in 1976 at Mount Hebron High School in Ellicott City, Maryland, the Naval Academy put out an article, the Baltimore Sun did a feature article on the Naval Academy, which was starting to accept women. So by law, all the service academies, which is the Naval Academy in Annapolis, the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, West Point, and the Coast Guard Academy in New London, Connecticut, had to open their doors to women. They'd been men only up until then. Yeah. And I got this article brought over by a neighbor who said to my mother, hey, Sandy's a tomboy, maybe she'll like to see about this new opportunity for women to attend a service academy. So I read this feature spread in the Baltimore Sun about the Coast Guard, the Naval Academy, and had never thought about the Coast Guard. And I thought, this is for me. It's a chance to be part of something bigger than myself, to serve a noble purpose, to sail the 4 winds and 7 seas. And I was very excited about that. And it was a new opportunity, heretofore not available. And I liked that idea of getting to do something that hadn't been available.
Did you talk to people at your school about it? I mean, did anybody try to dissuade you?
Nobody.
Or did everybody encourage you?
No, my guidance counselor, who had been my swim coach, PJ Kesmodal, he did say, Sandy, you've got to cast a wider net, because I was just going to apply to the Naval Academy. Yeah. He said, look at this flyer I got in the mail from this thing called the Coast Guard Academy in New London, Connecticut. We poured over that flyer. And between the 2 of us, we thought, well, this is a small Navy, so I may as well apply there as a backup. And I heard from the Coast Guard Academy quickly, and my mother said, take your bird in hand. And I'm like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to send in my deposit and commit to the Coast Guard Academy. And I'm so thankful I did, because when the Coast Guard accepted women, our leaders said, we're going to accept them into every role that we have on all of our biggest ships that have weapon systems on board. We're not going to exclude them. And the Naval Academy and the Navy excluded women for decades with combat exclusion laws, which the Coast Guard never applied. So I had a chance to serve on the pointy end and do any job that was available.
Wow. What class of women were you at the Coast Guard?
I was the third class to enter with women.
So there were a couple of classes ahead of you of women, so there were some women when you got there.
Yes.
What did they tell you when you got there? What did the other women that were there tell you? Did
Well,
they caution you? Did they say, watch out for this? Or
there were a lot of supportive women who were senior to me,
Yeah.
but there were some who made it harder on us women
Really?
because they wanted to show they didn't favor us.
Yeah.
So sometimes you were feeling like the men were harder on you, and then some of the women were harder on you too, because they didn't want to make it look like they were giving a favor to another woman. So it was kind of tough that way, and I don't think women who were senior to us knew exactly how to treat the more junior women like me either. So it was hard.
Did folks suppose, like when you were there with other women students, did you all suppose, including the women that were ahead of you, that we would finish the Coast Guard Academy and then you would actually go into the Coast Guard and you'd have a career in the Coast Guard? Or
Yes.
did people think to themselves, I might do this for a little while, then I'll do something else?
There's a 5-year obligated service for going to a service academy because it's a free education. Free, and that nothing's really free. You
Nothing's
have
free,
to work
right?
really hard. But there is 5 years of obligated service, and I wasn't sure that I was going to stay past the 5 years. You just don't know when you're young.
yeah.
And as I went through the Coast Guard and hit my 5-year mark, I just stayed because the jobs were amazing.
What was your first job?
It was on an icebreaker sailing from the United States. I was in Long Beach, California, down to Antarctica to support the National Science Foundation's mission, the research mission down there.
What was I'm wanting to ask, like, what was that like? I'm just trying to think in terms of Antarctica. I mean, first of all, it's got to be, so you're at sea for like some incredible amount of time. I mean, you had to have stopped from time to time and hit land.
Yes, we were about 6 months underway, but we'd stop in port calls to have some liberty, which means you get to get off the ship,
Right.
stretch your legs.
How, like once a week or once a month?
No,
Or?
more like once a month.
Really?
And we'd resupply during those times.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was really an adventure. We got to see Tahiti, Fiji, New Zealand, Chile, Peru. It was really a wonderful thing for a young woman to be able to deploy on a life adventure, just like I'd envisioned. And Antarctica is just spectacular. There's not words to describe the beauty. There's 14,000-foot active volcanoes down there. There's all kinds of wildlife, seals, penguins. It's just amazing.
And is it cold beyond belief, or?
We were down there in the summertime, the Antarctic summer, but it was still cold.
Right.
But not
this,
that cold.
This summer is like, what, 30 degrees?
Yes, so it's not
Yeah,
that bad,
not that bad.
relatively.
Right. That's amazing. So, so you did your 5-year required time of service, and then you decided to stay. Now here's the question. So, are you already a Christian person, or you know, did you accept Christ at a young age, and you went into the Coast Guard as a Christian person, or were you on a ship and on a lonely night looking at the stars, you came to know Christ? I mean, tell us your story.
I didn't have one of these moments as a Christian where you can witness to when you had an experience of Jesus coming into you. And I, for a while, felt guilty about that, but I shouldn't have. When I was at the academy, I'd always been a Christian. I was raised Catholic, but became Protestant. That's another story. But at the Coast Guard Academy, I was physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually exhausted. It was very hard.
Yeah.
And as a first-year student, which we call a cadet. Yeah. And there was one night when I was really exhausted in all 4 of those areas, and I saw my roommate getting changed and running out the door, and I says, Amy, you can't leave, we'll get in trouble. She says, I'm going to Vespers. And I'm like, what's a Vesper? And it's a religious service on Wednesday night that cadets could go to for refreshing their spirit. And that changed my life. I'd already been a Christian, but the Chaplain Sager and Father Keefe, our 2 chaplains for the Coast Guard Academy, loved us. They gave us messages of faith. I was able to renew my spirit when I was still exhausted physically, mentally, and emotionally. So the spiritual renewal helped me survive the academy and graduate.
What a blessing, what a blessing. So people would say, well, so you're a Christian person, you're a person of faith, and you're in the military. You know, there are some Christian groups that would say, well, you know, we're pacifists because we follow Christ, And there are others, of course, that say, hey, but we're Americans and somebody's got to defend the country. And you know, you can be a Christian and also be somebody who defends the country. And even if that means being at the front, on the front lines and being ready to sacrifice your life for others. Has anybody ever challenged you that way with that kind of a conversation?
I've never been challenged that way. I think that you can live a life of service and a life of faith. I think they merge together. I think they're compatible. I go back to the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, faithfulness, gentleness, goodness, and self-control. And I think those serve a person well spiritually and on the front lines of their duties. And I think that it all goes to core values, which, like I say, I think are grounded in those fruits of the Spirit. And if you are built on a foundation of core values, I think, and if you look up to God for guidance, and one of my favorite verses is, trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean not unto your own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him and he shall direct thy paths. And I think that you can walk both worlds with confidence.
Yeah, I think you talk about that in your book, Breaking Ice and Breaking Glass. I mean, you've had here's a book. You've had, you're too humble to say it, but you've had a marvelous career. I mean, you are the first woman cadet, even though you were in the third class of women to be at the Academy, to be named a flag officer in the Coast Guard. That's outstanding. You ended up leading the Coast Guard Academy. That's outstanding. I mean, and then you have this marvelous career where you do all these firsts. You know, you end your career as Vice Admiral of the Coast Guard, which is awesome and outstanding. You are as humble as the day is long, which is wonderful. So all the things you talk about in your book show in your own life by how you conduct yourself and by your warmth and your sense of humility, which is wonderful. What do you say to young women who might want to be you, who might be considering whether or not this is for them? Because now, some people might say, well, does it mean I can't have a husband, I can't have a family? That didn't mean that for you. Where did you met your husband in your line of work?
Yes, I did. We were both in the Coast Guard, and we both got married for the first time at the age of 47. Wow. So it took me a long time to find the right person. I had been 12 years at sea over my career. He had been 14 years at sea. So we had been focused on serving our country, and we loved our jobs. We didn't know each other during that whole time. But yes, so I eventually met the right man. It just took a while, and I was living a fulfilling, rewarding, satisfying life. I had my Coast Guard family, I had God, and I didn't want for anything.
Yeah, what a blessing.
But to get back to your question on what I would tell young women, I would tell them, be mindful of what Joe says, because he is looking at this Admiral Stosz at the top of her career at the age of 60 years old, whatever year. I am 61 right now, but I was 58 when I retired. So I started out as an 18-year-old, scared, frightened young girl going up to Vespers to take solace in God to help get me through the hard times. And there were times when I almost quit. I had my resignation letter written twice in the Coast Guard to leave because I was under duress from challenging bosses or circumstances. So I would tell young women, you do something hard, you come in, and it is hard, and you're gonna hit walls, and you're gonna wanna quit. But hard work plus perseverance equals success, and you take it one push-up at a time, one meal at a time, one day at a time. And you start out here at this side of the table, and 40 years later you end up at that side of the table, one little step at a time. If you look at the whole thing from being a student to being an admiral, you'll never see yourself there. But if you look at yourself being a student and just graduating, and then going to your first ship and just enjoying that, but getting through that too, it's one thing at a time, not looking at the end and saying, I could never be an admiral.
Right. Do you think anybody would have supposed when you first started the Academy that you'd end up as an admiral, that you'd end up leading the Coast Guard Academy?
I'd have been the least likely to succeed because I was shy and quiet. I'm an introvert and I'm shy. And so I wasn't the loudest, most in-charge looking cadet. I led quietly, sort of from behind, and I asked people to do their jobs. I didn't have to bark orders. And that was not the way people got ahead in those days. This is
Right.
40 years ago. In the 1980s, people barked orders and exercised a chain of command top down, and they, were using a stick, and I was tending to want to use a carrot, and that wasn't in vogue in those days.
Right.
So
you chose more to lead by example than by barking orders and telling people what they had to do. I oftentimes think to myself, isn't that the more powerful way, the way that you chose? Because it's just like being a parent, which my wife and I have been and still are. When our kids were young, you could bark an order at them, tell them to do something, like go to bed or read your this or eat your spinach. But they learn more by what we did and by how we conducted ourselves than they did by what we said. Like if I'm trying to get them to eat their spinach, but I don't want, I say, well, I'm a grown up now, I don't have to eat spinach anymore, so I'm exempt. That would have spoken volumes to them, but they really were more moved, as they've told us as adults, by what we did, even more so than by what we said.
I've got a lesson called the 3 P's of Power that was taught to me when I was just a young woman, 22 years old. My boss taught me this. I came to him with a problem one day and said, "Sir, I can't get this crew member to do work for me. I'm having a hard time compelling him to comply." And he looked at me and said, "Sandy, there's 3 types of power. Personal power, professional power, and position power. And if you're going to succeed, you need to lean on the first 2. The personal power, which is your way with people, your persuasiveness, your motivation, your professional power, which is how you present yourself, what you know. If you lean on those 2, you shouldn't have to go to your position power,
Right.
what your rank is,
Right.
and you shouldn't have to bark orders. And that served me well because it makes you humble. It makes you work at earning respect and building trust with people at every level, instead of just presuming that because you're the senior person, they're going to respect you and do the job.
Right. What was the hardest? So if you could tell a story about something that was really hard for you when you were there, or even during your career, what would that really helped shape you into the marvelous human being that you are now? What would that story be?
There was several inflection points in my life, and maybe I'll go back to a formative stage of when I was a cadet. And I was on a training mission as a cadet down in Alabama, and I got a phone call one day that I was going to be sent to the executive officer's office. I had to pack my bags and get ready to go home, back to the academy. Go home to my home. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they're kicking me out. I must have done something wrong. There was no explanation. I was just told, pack your bags, you're going to see the executive officer, who's always a disciplinarian. And so I reported to the executive officer at this big base where I was training, and I thought, I'm being kicked out. Well, he told me, and he opened up a little Bible, and he told me, I have to let you know your 17-year-old brother has died in a car crash. And I'm like, but I'm supposed to be getting kicked out because I did something wrong that I don't know about. My brother's not dead. This is not happening, because I had made my mind up I was being kicked out and sent home because I had done something that I didn't know about, because you can get in trouble
Right.
without even knowing it. And I couldn't accept that my brother had died, but then I was on the phone with my mother and I'm going home, and that was formative because young people, it's hard to lose somebody. I had to turn to God because no human could give me the answers. And by putting my faith in God so early in my career as a student, that sustained me for 40 years.
Wow, that's a powerful story, powerful story. We'll let our guests take a deep breath. When we come back, I'll ask the Admiral about the qualities that make extraordinary people, ordinary people, extraordinary leaders. What are the character traits and values that need to be a part of every successful leader, inside and outside of the military? Stay with us.
You're watching Joe Watkins' State of Independence on Lighthouse TV. Positively different. Share your comments about today's program in the comment box at joewatkins.org.
We're with Admiral Sandy Stosz, a woman profiled in a national magazine as a leader to watch, someone who's been entrusted with great responsibilities during her nearly four decades, a full 4 decades of service to the country in the United States Coast Guard. And I want to take our final minutes to explore the traits and values that make leaders worth following. You have been a great leader, and you talked about the P's, the personal power and
professional power, and position power.
What other traits do you think make for great leaders? Because I'm sure there were some people that certainly in the Coast Guard and in some of the other services that you really admired or admire. What would you say are the traits that mark them as great?
I'm going to pick humility first and foremost. And it's hard to be humble when you're in a position where you go up in rank and become more powerful. It's kind of like gaining extra pounds. You don't notice them because they come on an ounce at a time. You can get to have hubris a little bit at a time as you get more position power, and people scramble to do everything that you ask them to do. Pretty soon they're telling you what you want to hear, not what you need to know. So finding a way to not just keep your own humility, but to make sure your people who are serving you, and you're all serving a greater purpose, the missions of the Coast Guard, to keep focused on the missions and not focused on pleasing the senior leader, whether it's the CEO of a company or the leader in the military or anywhere you are. Humility is so critical because people will fall from hubris. And I learned that first off by taking a class in the Tragic Hero. And all the tragic heroes, whether it's Shakespeare or somewhere else, they fall from grace because of their tragic flaw, and it's always related to hubris. Yeah. So humility to me is first and foremost.
Yeah. How do you get people to, as a leader, I mean, whether it's at the academy or as an admiral, how do you get the people under you, in addition to the humility that you have, to buy into the mission, to buy into where you're headed or where you want to take the institution or where you want to take the folks that you're leading? How do you get them to buy in? Humility certainly is wonderfully helpful because it makes you approachable. You know, if somebody doesn't have to worry about you taking their head off, so to speak. If I was a cadet and you were a commander, if I knew that you were a humble person, I might be inclined to approach you because I wouldn't be afraid that you'd take my head off. You know, if I asked a question that might be a stupid question or one that you might think wasn't a good question. But what other traits do you think get people to buy into the vision, to see your vision and to adopt it as their own and then to follow you, so much so that they'd be willing to give their lives?
Motivation. So a leader has to be able to motivate their people, and they do that by asking more of them. They do that by empowering them, by giving them more authority, a broader scope, by asking them to work together to get a coffee cup and walk around. If it's a ship, like I was on for 12 years, get a coffee cup and walk around and collaborate, cooperate, and come together to meet the mission, a greater purpose, a unified sense of purpose, and motivate people around that. And people, when you ask more of them, they are excited to deliver. You create a sense of excitement, a sense of empowerment, and that spreads throughout the entire unit, whether it's a ship or whether it's an office environment, whether it's the military or the private sector or the nonprofit. You're going to find that motivating people is going to bring out the best in everybody and rise the entire organization and all the individuals in it.
Now, you had men that were under you as well. What were the challenges you faced as a woman in charge of women and men?
There were challenges. I was the first and only woman on a number of my ships, but there's a power in being different. And I was used to being the only girl because I had 3 brothers. So, and I was the only girl a lot of the times in my life. But when I came onto ships and I was the only woman, it was the men who were off balance. I already kind of had this game down. So I took it upon myself to put them at ease, to help them to understand how to work with a woman, that it's not so different than going to school with women, having women in your family. So I had to break the ice, so to speak, in a figurative way, and let people know, hey, here's what's to expect, and help them understand what you need from them, help them to deliver so that they see they can succeed under your leadership, and be real. And I had a little inflection point, another one, when I was on this ship early in my career. I was probably about 25 or 6, and I was standing the watch one night at sea with one of the guys, and I was the only woman on the ship out of about 50 men. And he says, "Ma'am, we like having you on board because we don't want rude and crude behavior in the lunchroom, which we call the mess deck. We can use you as an excuse now and clean up the act. And I'm like, wow, that was empowering to me. So the next day when I was walking down to that mess deck, that lunchroom, I heard somebody cussing. And I said, hey, Kenny, you can't cuss. Would you do that in front of your mom or your sister? He says, no, ma'am. And I'm like, well, you can't do it here either. And I did it with humor. Yeah. So I didn't make Kenny lose face, because I wouldn't want to do that. So I kind of did it with humor, and everybody kind of laughed. And they're like, oh, Miss Stosz is here. We can't cuss anymore. It was empowering. So the power of being different.
Yeah, yeah. You had a Bible, as you were talking, on your desk. You know, in the service, you can't openly tell people about your faith. You certainly can't lead with it, because you're in service to country, and there is a separation between church and state. And so I suppose the way that you got across what you believed was by how you lived.
Certainly you have to model the way, and you have to live the life you want others to follow. That is so hard. I failed in that. I did. I could have been such a better person. But speaking of the Bible, I would lay that Bible on my desk. It was a big old Bible, a ryrie, and I let it speak for itself. The Word of God came out of that thing. And once in a while, people will come into your office, if you're in an office, not necessarily on a ship because everything moves around, and they'd see that Bible. And sometimes they'd start a conversation, oh, ma'am, I see your Bible. And it would give me a chance to talk about my faith. And like I said, I think my faith is what got me through, because I wasn't always the best role model. And I looked to God a lot to be a better person and to help guide me in how I could model the way. And I wasn't perfect, but I think
none of us are.
God helped me when I needed it most and helped me to be the best I could be, which is all I can ask.
Yeah, God is so good and kind in that regard.
Yes.
Your story is our story. None of us are everything that he or she was meant to be, made to be, but with God's grace, you know, God is able to use us even in our imperfection, which is so good and wonderful about him. Sandra, you have been a wonderful guest, and I hope everybody will go out and get this book. It's called Breaking Ice and Breaking Glass, and it's Sandy's story. It's a great story, but it'll also help you with your life, especially if you're looking for a direction on how to be a great leader. Well, that's all the time we have for this week's program. There's an old hymn that many of you used to sing that said, "I'll go where you want me to go, dear Lord, or mountains, or plains, or seas. I'll be what you want me to be." No matter how old you are, my prayer for you is that when you feel the leading of the Holy Spirit, like Sandy did, that you say, yes, here am I, Lord, send me. I know from personal experience that he'll give you the strength to do it. He certainly did for Sandy. Here at State of Independence, our mission is to equip you to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as you love yourself. And all that's impossible without a personal relationship with him. I hope you'll give yourself to Christ, believe in him, and follow him. Send me a quick note if you can at joewatkins.org. Let me know how Admiral Stosz's life of servant leadership has encouraged you. From America's first capital, Philadelphia, I'm Joe Watkins. Thanks so much for watching. Thank you so much, Sandra.
Thank you, Joe.
What a blessing.
You're just a great interviewer. You just
God is good. Your
pull the thread through.
Powerful. Your story is so powerful. I'm hoping it.
Joe Watkins' State of Independence is a production of Lighthouse TV, positively different. Made possible in part because of the support of viewers like you.